They docked 15 minutes from my paycheck because I clocked in 60 seconds late. So I sat still for 15 minutes. Didn't lift a finger. The silence in that break room was louder than Rick Coleman's authority. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't just taking a stand. I was giving the rest of my team permission to do the same. I'm Brittany. I'm 42, a senior equipment technician at a regional logistics center in Milwaukee. For the last 12 years, I've been showing up to work before dawn, wrench in hand, steel-toed boots on, and not a single complaint. You'd think after more than a decade of loyalty, they'd cut me a little slack. But corporate doesn't work that way anymore, especially when someone like Rick Coleman walks in the door. Rick was new. Not new to the company, just new to us. He transferred from the manufacturing side after a personnel issue no one really talked about, and was placed as our new shift supervisor. The moment he showed up, the energy changed. He was one of those middle managers who read one too many books about discipline and thought fear was the same as respect. Rick wasn't subtle about who rubbed him the wrong way. And unfortunately, I made his list early. Probably because I had the nerve to challenge a safety protocol he tried to enforce during our morning briefing. His response? He smiled, thanked me in front of everyone, and then gave me the cold shoulder for the rest of the week. Then came the policy. All employees must be clocked in by exactly 6:00 a.m., Rick announced, pacing in front of us like he was giving a sermon. If you clock in at 6:01, that's considered late. And that means we dock 15 minutes from your daily hours. No exceptions. We thought he was joking. Nobody's that petty. Turns out, Rick was. That next morning, I was already on site by 5:50, like always. But in the scramble of getting my PPE gear on, I realized I'd left my ID badge in the car. So I jogged back through the parking lot, grabbed it, ran back in, and clocked in at 6:01. Rick was standing there like a warden watching a prison gate. 6:01, he said, not even looking up from his clipboard. That's 15 minutes docked. I blinked. You've got to be kidding. He didn't blink back. Rules are rules, Brittany. Something in me snapped, but it wasn't loud or angry. It was quiet, cold, calculated. Then I'll start working at 6:15, I said evenly. I walked straight to the break area, set my tools down, and sat. Rick followed me. You're on the clock. No, I said. You docked me. I don't work for free. The way he stared at me, you'd think I'd just insulted his mother, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't being insubordinate. I was following his rules to the letter. He had no idea the ripple that moment was about to cause. The room went still. You could hear the hum of the vending machine in the corner, the clink of someone nervously stirring their coffee. But no one said a word. Rick stood there like he was waiting for me to crack. I didn't. I just sat, hands folded, eyes level with his. He finally scoffed and stormed off. I stayed exactly where I was until 6:15. Then, like nothing had happened, I stood up, walked to my station, and started my shift. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I followed his rules. Exactly. But my silence echoed far louder than any protest. By lunchtime, word had traveled faster than any shipping route in that warehouse. People were whispering, glancing over at me, like I'd done something revolutionary. But all I had done was sit down, sit still, refuse to be used. And for the first time in a long time, I realized something terrifying. Most of us don't even realize we've been conditioned to accept unfairness until someone dares to stop playing along. That night after work, I sat in my car and cried. Not because I was afraid, but because I was exhausted. Physically, mentally, emotionally. 12 years of giving everything I had. Never being late, never saying no. Always picking up the slack when someone else called out. And all it took was 1 minute, 60 seconds, for my dignity to be up for grabs. It didn't matter that I'd been there longer than 3 supervisors combined. It didn't matter that I trained half the team. To Rick, I was just another number on a clipboard. Another name he could cross out to feel in control. The next morning, I arrived at the warehouse at 5:55 like always. I sat in my car and waited. One of the newer guys, Kevin, pulled into the spot next to me. He went 6:02. He looked over, confused. "You not going in?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "I'll start working at 6:15. I was late." He blinked. "You're serious?" "I don't work for free," I said softly. "Neither should you." Kevin paused. Then he put his keys back in the ignition and turned on the radio. He waited with me. And that was the beginning. Over the next few days, more and more people started doing the same thing. If someone was going to be docked 15 minutes, they gave the company exactly what it paid for, no more, no less. They didn't march. They didn't chant. They simply waited. We weren't lazy. We weren't defiant. We were precise, and it drove Rick insane. He started pacing the floor in the mornings, watching people sit in their cars, drumming his fingers against his clipboard like he was counting down bombs instead of payroll deductions. One morning, he cornered me near the maintenance lockers. "You think you're clever, Brittany?" he hissed. "You're poisoning the culture here." I looked him dead in the eye. "No, Rick. I'm reminding people they're human, not machines." For a second, something flickered behind his eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe panic, maybe both, but he said nothing more. What he didn't know was that he'd already lost control. The very rule he used to punish me had become the match that lit a silent rebellion. And the fire? It was only just beginning. It didn't take long before Rick realized something had shifted. The energy in the warehouse was different now. No more rushed footsteps at 5:59, no more panicked clock-ins or flustered apologies. Instead, the parking lot at 6:00 looked like a drive-in theater. Dozens of employees sitting quietly in their cars, sipping coffee, scrolling their phones, waiting for 6:15 to roll around. Too late for the docked 15 minutes. Just in time to legally begin work. It was surreal. Rick watched from the break room window every morning like a sentry on high alert, clipboard in hand. Jaw clenched so tight you could see the muscle twitch in his neck. His rule was being followed to the letter, and it was tearing his entire shift apart. Too ironic, too perfect, too deserved. But it wasn't just the morning shift that changed. By the end of the first week, even the guys on the second shift heard what was happening and began pushing back. If someone stayed late to cover for another crew, they made sure it was tracked and signed off. No more favors, no more unpaid overtime. People stopped jumping at every barked command. They didn't say no. They just moved slower, asked for everything in writing, asked if they'd be compensated for this or that or the other. It was like watching a sleeping giant wake up. And Rick? He spiraled. He started calling emergency meetings. He raised his voice more often, sent out long, overcomplicated emails stuffed with legal buzzwords and corporate policies, trying to regain a grip that was already slipping from his hands. One morning, he went off during a stand-up huddle. "You think this is a game?" he snapped. "You think you're clever? Wasting company time, dragging morale through the dirt? This isn't how a team functions." Nobody said a word. I could feel my chest tightening, not out of fear, but from the deep, slow-burning anger that comes from watching a man bully an entire room and pretend it's leadership. That afternoon, I went to HR. Not to file a complaint, not yet, but to document. Just enough to make a record. The woman behind the desk gave me a careful look, like she already knew my name. That should have been comforting. Instead, it made my stomach twist. I walked back to the floor and tried to focus on my work. But as I tightened bolts and ran diagnostics on one of the hydraulic lifts, I couldn't shake the feeling. This wasn't over. Not even close. That evening, Kevin followed me out to the lot. "Hey, Britt," he said quietly. "He's been watching you like a hawk." I gave a dry laugh. "Let him. I'm not breaking any rules." "No, but you broke his illusion of control," he replied. "That's worse to him." And maybe Kevin was right. Because the next day, Rick didn't speak to anyone. He walked in, slammed his office door, and stayed inside for almost the entire shift. People moved freely, tension lowered, and, for the first time in weeks, it felt almost normal again. But oh, that peace didn't last long. On Friday, Rick returned to the floor with a new tactic: performance audits. He began pulling people into his office one by one for productivity evaluations, questioning every break, every second spent waiting on machinery, or verifying safety. He started citing obscure parts of the employee handbook no one had ever heard of. It was targeted, vindictive, and guess who was first on his list? Me. "Your productivity is down 11% this month," he said, eyes narrow. "Care to explain?" I almost laughed. "You docked my time and I gave you exactly what you paid for," he sneered. "I'm starting to think your attitude's a bigger problem than your punctuality." Wow. That was rich, but I didn't let him rattle me. I folded my hands and said calmly, "If this is a formal disciplinary meeting, I'd like to have an HR rep present." The pause that followed? Delicious. He waved me off. "Fine, you're excused." Excused? Like a child in detention. I walked out of that room feeling both fire and clarity in my bones. He was coming for me, no doubt about it. And part of me was scared. But a bigger part, the part that had been humiliated, silenced, and dismissed for years, was ready. Because what Rick didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment since the first time I was passed over for a promotion I trained someone else to get. Since the first time I was told to be more flexible when a male coworker showed up late and I had to cover for him without overtime. I was tired of being polite about injustice. The line had been drawn. Rick crossed it. And I wasn't backing down. The Monday after Rick's so-called productivity audits, the air in the warehouse was thick, not with fear, but with resolve. People moved differently now. Not slower, not lazier, just calculated, focused, like they'd been reminded that their time, their dignity, had value. No one said it out loud, but the mood had shifted from silent frustration to quiet solidarity. I wasn't the only one he'd pulled into that office. By the end of the week, at least 6 others had been reviewed for efficiency, punctuality, or vague attitude issues. It was petty, vindictive, predictable. But what Rick failed to realize was that he was outnumbered. And more importantly, he was being watched. HR began receiving an unusual number of inquiries, anonymous notes, carefully worded emails, nothing aggressive, nothing direct, just enough to raise eyebrows. They say when enough voices whisper, it starts to sound like thunder. By Wednesday, HR sent out a company-wide message reminding employees of their rights regarding workplace treatment and retaliation. Subtle, but we all knew exactly what it meant. That morning, I noticed something unexpected. Kevin had started keeping a small notebook in his pocket. Not for gossip, not for show, just notes, timestamps, interactions. He caught me glancing at it once and gave me a tiny smile. "Paper trail?" he said. "Just in case." God, it was both inspiring and heartbreaking. What kind of workplace makes people feel they need evidence just to stay safe? Still, Rick pushed harder. He began shadowing the morning crews, walking the floor like some corporate ghost, pretending to observe. But we all knew he was looking for someone, anyone, to trip up. He hovered. He nitpicked. He asked questions he already knew the answers to, just to catch people off guard. And yet, not a single person cracked. One woman, Sandra, was asked why she took a bathroom break at 9:32 instead of waiting until 10. She looked him straight in the eye and said, "Bladder doesn't follow schedules, Rick." I almost laughed out loud. Too bold. Too perfect. That afternoon, things escalated. Rick called a full team meeting in the break room. He stood at the front, arms crossed, voice sharp. "Let's get something straight. This culture of passive resistance stops now. If you're on this team, you show up, you comply, and you do as instructed, without delay. He looked at me when he said it. I didn't blink. Then, like fate itself was watching, someone from HR walked into the break room mid-speech. Her name was Carla, and I'd spoken to her just days before. She smiled politely. "Sorry to interrupt. Just here to observe today's team engagement." The timing, the tension, the look on Rick's face, I could have cried from satisfaction. He stammered, then dismissed the meeting 5 minutes early. From that moment on, people walked taller. The fear? It was crumbling. The man who tried to control us with minutes was now being measured by the hour. Every word, every order, every glance monitored. But still, I knew Rick wasn't done. No man who thrives on control goes down without swinging. And I could feel it in my bones. The next swing would be aimed directly at me. I didn't know when the blow would come, only that it would. Rick wasn't the kind of man to lose quietly. His silence these past few days hadn't been surrender. It was strategy. And I'd been in this workplace long enough to recognize the calm before a storm engineered by someone in power. The kind of storm that's personal, precise. So when I was called into HR on Friday morning, I wasn't surprised. But I was still disappointed. Deeply, bitterly disappointed. Carla greeted me at the door. Her face was neutral, but her eyes gave something away. Hesitation. Maybe regret. That made my stomach drop. "We received a report regarding inappropriate conduct," she began, motioning for me to take a seat. "Inappropriate conduct?" I echoed, eyebrows raised. "From me?" She slid a printed sheet across the table. It was a formal write-up. According to Rick Coleman, I had been disruptive to workflow, disrespectful in communication, and a cause of diminished morale across the team. I almost laughed. Disruptive? For sitting still when I wasn't on the clock? Disrespectful? For quoting the employee handbook back to him? Morale damage? If anything, morale had improved, because people finally felt empowered to defend themselves. But this was something else entirely. "This feels retaliatory," I said quietly. "Especially considering I spoke with you just last week about his behavior." Carla looked at me. "You're not the only one who's come forward. But this is now on paper, Brittany. I'm required to document it. I can't erase it without a formal investigation." I swallowed the knot in my throat. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a setup, a chess move. Rick wasn't trying to punish me. He was trying to build a case, a trail of infractions that could justify a termination. Too predictable, too low, too damn familiar. I thanked Carla for her time and walked back to the floor, head held high. But inside, I was shaking, furious, tired. Not just from this week, not just from Rick. From years of being the good employee, the loyal one, the go-to, and watching less competent men fail upward while women like me got cornered for speaking up. That night, I went home and opened my personal laptop. I started gathering every document, every screenshot, every email that hinted at Rick's pattern, his policy changes, his time dock threats, his exact words in team chats. I wasn't planning a tantrum. I was preparing a timeline. By Sunday, I had 10 pages of evidence and a list of witnesses who had either been audited, written up, or intimidated in the last 3 weeks. Some had even agreed to write statements. Others offered to speak with HR directly. A few were scared, but supportive. Monday morning, I dropped the envelope on Carla's desk. No drama, just truth. "I believe this qualifies as a formal complaint," I said. She didn't even look surprised. She nodded slowly and said, "Thank you, Brittany. We've been receiving reports, but yours may be the most complete." And just like that, the momentum shifted. That same afternoon, a quiet but undeniable ripple moved through the building. Rick was nowhere to be seen. His door stayed closed. His name didn't appear on the 2 p.m. huddle schedule. By 4 p.m., someone whispered that regional management had called him into a closed-door meeting upstairs. When I left for the day, Kevin passed me in the parking lot. "You did it, didn't you?" he asked. I shrugged. All I did was tell the truth. He smiled. Sometimes, that's more dangerous than any lie. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. But not because I thought it was over. Because I knew something was finally beginning. Rick had made his move. And I'd returned it. Clean, calculated, undeniable. Now it wasn't just about me anymore. The company had to decide whether they stood for power or for people. And from the way things were unfolding, they were about to answer loud and clear. By Tuesday morning, the silence around Rick's office said more than any memo ever could. His car was in the lot, but he hadn't been seen on the floor. No morning huddle, no clipboard patrol, just absence. And not the kind that felt like a break, but the kind that felt like the air was shifting before a storm fully rolled in. Rumors started circulating fast. Some said he was suspended pending investigation. Others heard whispers about HR bringing in compliance officers from the regional office. One thing was clear, the company was no longer brushing this under the rug. I wasn't celebrating, not yet. I'd seen too many moments like this where companies swept things under vague restructuring labels and let bad actors walk away with clean records and padded severance packages. Still, I could feel it. Something was different this time. And then, the interviews began. HR scheduled private meetings with employees across shifts, individually, discreetly. Kevin went in first, then Sandra, then Mark from inventory. One by one, people who'd been quietly collecting their own paper trails began stepping forward. No protests, no picket signs. Just the power of truth laid bare in cold, clear documentation. When it was my turn, I was ready. Carla met me with a warm nod, but she was accompanied this time by someone I hadn't met before. A woman in a navy pantsuit with a notepad that never left her hand. "Brittany, thank you for coming," Carla said. "This is Dana Kim from Regional Compliance." Dana didn't waste time. She asked precise questions. Measured but firm. "Did you ever feel you were targeted for retaliation after raising concerns about company policy?" "Yes." "That? Were you ever reprimanded without proper due process?" I handed over the write-up Rick issued. This was never investigated. It was issued the day after I sat out the 15-minute docked time. Dana studied it carefully, then made a note. The tone of the meeting wasn't accusatory, it was forensic. Like they already knew the answer and were just collecting the final puzzle pieces. By the time I walked out, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt vindicated, but also deeply tired. Too many women I knew had gone through battles like this. Quiet wars fought behind glass doors and email threads, where the cost of speaking up was career stagnation, blacklisting, or worse. I'd prepared myself for that too. But now, for the first time in a long while, it felt like maybe the outcome would be different. 2 days passed. Then, Friday morning, a company-wide email arrived. Effective immediately, Rick Coleman is no longer employed at company name. Leadership is reviewing all shift management policies and encourages anyone with concerns to speak directly with Human Resources or Regional Compliance. We thank you for your continued commitment to a safe and respectful workplace. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I was shocked, but because I finally exhaled. It was over. No public drama, no drawn-out courtroom, just quiet accountability. Kevin walked by my workstation later that morning and gave me a look. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, just processing." He smiled. "We got him." But I shook my head gently. "No, we stood up for ourselves. That's the win." Still, part of me knew Rick was just one chapter. There was still work to do, still systems to challenge. But for now, at least, we had a victory. And I was finally ready to tell the whole story. Rick's departure didn't come with confetti. No victory parade. No cathartic confrontation. Just an email, a few side glances in the break room, and the sudden absence of someone we had all learned to fear in silence. And yet, that silence now felt different. It didn't shrink the room, it expanded it. In the weeks that followed, things slowly recalibrated. We weren't walking on eggshells anymore. People spoke more openly, laughed louder during breaks, stopped looking over their shoulders every time they took a breath. Still, for me, it wasn't about getting back to normal, because normal is what allowed men like Rick to thrive in the first place. What mattered most wasn't that he was gone, it was that we were finally seen. One afternoon, Carla pulled me aside after a meeting. "Just so you know," she said with a small smile, "your complaint helped spark a full internal review across multiple departments." I blinked. "Wait, this wasn't just about our warehouse?" She nodded. "Turns out, Rick left a trail. You just happened to stop it before it got worse." Wow! That hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't trying to be anyone's hero. I just didn't want to be invisible. But maybe that's how change really starts. Not with noise, but with refusal. Refusal to be belittled, to be silenced, to be docked, dismissed, or destroyed. I don't know what's next for me. I still work here. I still clock in before sunrise. But I do it differently now, with a sense of dignity I thought this place had taken from me. And every time I see someone else stand a little taller, speak a little firmer, I know that 15-minute sit-down wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Sometimes it's not the loudest voice that sparks change, but the quietest moment of resistance. What Brittany did wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate, and it reminded us all that dignity isn't something you earn by playing nice. It's something you defend when it's threatened. Have you ever been punished for speaking up? Have you ever stayed silent just to keep your job? Tell us in the comments, not just for you, but for someone who still hasn't found the courage to speak. Because your story might be someone else's turning point.